Today, we're talking to Hrishi Dixit, principal at Gordian Labs, about making yourself redundant as a tech leader. You're listening to Joel Beasley, Modern CTO.
I want to get into this, how to make yourself redundant. And I think I saw that you did a blog post about this, and was that correct?
Yeah, well, I had the beginnings of one, so I made a note of that in a blog post, and I wanted to expand it out, but I thought this was a lot more interesting and fun way to talk about it, and then maybe I'll do a blog post following that as well.
Yeah.
But
so how do you do it? And I know that there's a lot of hesitation. There's definitely some people that are listening that are earlier in their career, which is completely fine. And they're not, entrepreneurs, like solo founder type people. They're just running an engineering team or software project, And for those people, I have found they've approached me privately and have given me essentially the feedback that they're kind of scared. They're scared. Like, what if I am redundant? Like, what if I'm not useless? I need to always find ways to make myself completely ingrained in things so that I'm valuable and I don't get cut if there's cuts, and so that I'm absolutely needed. Mm-hmm. And then I don't see that problem with the entrepreneurs. Like, my job is, as an entrepreneur, it's like I'm trying to scale this thing. So the goal is figure out how the process works, operate it successfully, hand it off. Like, give it to somebody else who can then manage it and be intelligent and change it as needed. And that way I make myself redundant out of the process.
Yeah, that's something that I sort of learned on the job. Part of it is, so how do you do this? Like, we can do the 4 ways to make yourself redundant. And there's actually some very key steps that are involved there. And it sounds simple, like 4 steps, but they're actually incredibly difficult. At least they were for me. So the first thing is let's before we jump into that, I think the reason to make yourself redundant, you have to be very clear about why. And if you have a hesitation about that, what is the reason you're hesitant to make it? Job security is the obvious reason, but is that really the reason you want to continue being at a place because you're afraid that you're you're scared that what you bring to the table may be difficult to port over. And I'm speaking in the context of my own skill set and my own role as a CTO. I totally understand this. There are others that are so bespoke that it is important. But for me, I don't want to be. I never felt comfortable being in a place and continuing to be in a place and hanging on to that role through any means possible. And the easiest one to do is just I'm the only one who knows the password to this provider, or I'm the only person who's built this particular relationship with this vendor or that provider. And it's kind of it's in part self-destructive, and it's also not fair to the business or the company that you've helped grow. And again, it depends on what stage you come in. There are career roles, and I totally respect that. The kind of work that I like to do, which is get something off the ground. That's what I've done most of my career, both as an engineer and as a tech leader. To get something off the ground, that's a freaking rush. That's like adrenaline, And but when you get to a certain scale, the nature of your role changes, and you're not building anything more. You're doing important things. You're managing a team. You're creating and sustaining the culture. You're evangelizing your business. All of that is important, but it's not that early stage rush goes away, and to get back, the only way to do that is you can get so big that you can carve out incubate a little startup within a bigger org, and be that for that little unit. Most often, you're just moving on to the next thing, right? So, what are these 4 things? So, some of these and many of these may sound obvious, but if I have to just rattle them off, so start distributing knowledge. Any concentration of how things work or where things are, just build a knowledge base. Since day one, and this is certainly not limited to a CTO or even engineering. You want this everywhere in the org. You want and there is a very easy correlation to system design as well, which we'll get to. But start distributing your knowledge and start de-weeding yourself. Like, the more you are in the trenches, and this is a natural evolution of a startup early stage CTO, when you are the trench in the beginning. You're literally the person who's not only coding, you're designing, you're fixing the router, you're doing all of it. Like, there is no one else, or maybe very few others. The moment you hit some kind of like stage, like Series A is kind of like a sort of de facto milestone in my head, because that's how it's worked for me. Sometimes maybe later, sometimes even sooner, because now these days people are raising like 100 million seed rounds. It blows my mind. But that when you get to a point where you can see the scale ahead of you, start getting yourself out of the weeds. That itself takes multiple shapes. The obvious one is start building your team. You can't take yourself out of the weeds unless someone else is in the weeds, obviously. So start building your team. But the most important thing, this is the third point, there is a tremendous amount of talent around. You'll build your team, no problem. Especially if you have the resources to get top talent, you're going to get it, right? It's really, really hard to find good engineering leaders. This is my experience. And what you really want to build, this is the third point, you want to start designing the leadership of your org. We had a very well-defined, and it's an evolutionary beast as well. It changes over time, but we very early on took the time to design the entire technology organization, both at Yale Street and even before that at LearnVest. Like, this is how, and these are just boxes with labels, but not just like, hey, here's a title, here's a cool sounding title. There was a detailed doc that ran behind it. They actually drew inspiration from Circle CI's little chart of like, get you done, tech competencies, management skills, blah, blah. So we had the management track, we had the IC track, we even had a middle track for a little bit, but that just got too complicated. So we kind of simplified it. But build your leadership layer, because that's the beginning of your transition plan. That's the beginning of your succession plan. It's really hard at a certain scale for an external CTO, especially CTO, because A, that's my experience, and B, engineers are weird people. They are, speaking as one, like I'm weird, like, for me to respect a new leader that's coming in out for the cold, like I'm going to spend a ton of time just being in a grudging benefit of doubt, overladen with suspicion. I'm going to check their background, I'm going to poke to see their tech competencies. The smoothest track is someone who's entrenched in your org already, who is immersed in the culture, immersed in the technology, immersed in the platform, and has the essential leadership skills to kind of grow into that role. So building that second layer of leadership, and you identify, okay, the classic hit by a bus exercise, like who's going to take over and what do they need to know. So we had that. We started building those. I started building those structures and the people. Like, so it's like, okay. And some people don't want to do it. Some people are, they just love the engineering. They just want to do, that. Totally respect that. Absolutely needed. But it's almost like a unicorn type role where someone can simultaneously be a solid engineer, because that's who the team is going to trust. You maybe scale to like 25 to 30, 25 people, anything under 25, you can still adjust like people. So like, again, these are empirical numbers, like, maybe different. But you get about 20 or 25, you have created a certain ethos, a certain zeitgeist, a certain culture in your org. It's really hard for an external entity to fit into it. It's possible, but it's really hard. Your best bet of minimizing disruption is to internally promote someone who's already immersed in that culture, who's not just immersed, but also has had a hand in shaping it, And that's, I mean, I spent a little time on that third point, but it's a good segue into the fourth point, that culture. Because that's the thing that's going to outlast you and your successor and everyone else, That's the thing that keeps people, it's important for retention, but it's important to screen. If you decide that, okay, I'm going to get Diversa or someone to get the next CTO in or the next, okay, how do you even vet that person? You're going to see their background. You go, oh, this is like, he or she has been at these great startups. And it's like, that's great. So the tech chops are spoken for. Will they fit in? Like, and you don't know if they will fit in if you know what fitting in looks like. And that the core of that is in the culture that you send. It's the hardest thing to build and sustain. And it takes a day. to brick it, and it'll take a year to rebuild it if you brick it. So those are the four things, if I just to kind of summarize, like the basic distribution of knowledge, create this vibrant knowledge base, start getting yourself out of the weeds, which is just scaling your team, and but start designing your org leadership. That's your succession plan, and start laying down very early on, that day one. This starts on day one. Like start laying the foundation for your culture. What is the culture you want to build? What do you tolerate? What are the guardrails? What will you not stand for? I've fired people in the past who were brilliant engineers who just didn't play well with the team. Like they didn't fit in. Like it's just
well, it's like look at the Navy SEAL guys, right? They select for your ability to put others ahead of yourself, and they select for your ability to make the team successful and not you as an individual. So a lot of like really talented individual people get kicked out and they don't make it through because they don't have that ability to bond and achieve it together.
And it's actually like, those sort of like, being able to sense that bad hire, like you'll have the bad hire.
You're always going to have bad hires.
You're always going to have. But knowing that, okay, well, this goes counter to every mode of interaction that we've cultivated over the years. Like, what is the mode of engagement? How do we talk to each other? What words do we deploy? What words do we stay away from? The tricky thing with that sort of bad hire is if you're not able to detect that, which is difficult to if you don't know. Well, like they just stick out like a sore thumb when you have a well-defined culture. You will lose half your team just in your attempt to either retain this bad hire or not even being able to realize that this is a bad hire. So part of this growing your org leadership, which is again, like, again, it's the hard part. I mean, I would wish I had like a crystal ball, but it's about like, if you believe that your leadership style is the kind that will keep this team that you spend so much time building and culture you still spend building together, you need to, this is probably more than half of your time and effort at a certain level of scale, where you're just making sure that your leaders who are your culture ambassadors, like everyone is, like, you are absolutely in tune with them. You're having those one-on-ones every week, and you're talking not just about like, okay, hey, do some cost cutting here or do some like, optimization there. And like, but like, hey, like we had these OKRs that I laid out for both for myself and also my team. Like, okay, you need to have X, you being, let's say, one of my directs who may be someone that I'm hoping will be able to take over. Like, you need some executive presence. You need to be you need some face time with the C-suite. You need to be in the leadership team. So I'm going to create these opportunities for you to present what you're like. I can easily go and present something like, they're doing the work. This is like part of number two is deweeding. Is once you're out of the weeds, you don't know the details. Like, and so if I look at a stat trace in a log on a Grafana dashboard, and the first few months, I'll know where to go and fix it. 2 years in, I have no freaking clue. But I'm not supposed to. It's the right thing that I don't know. But I also take comfort in the fact that the people that I are looking at it and that do know what that means and how to address that are people that have almost like handpicked and made sure that are the right kind of leaders that will be able to take over in difficult situations. Because beyond a point, your job primarily becomes providing air cover for your team to do the best work. Once you've built your team and made yourself taken yourself out of the weeds, what you need to do is like get out of the way and shield.
That's hard. But that's hard.
It's really, really hard.
I've seen so many people, Hrishi, who like, I want to make sure I say this correctly and like anonymize it enough to not call anybody out. But there'll be a CTO. They'll get to that point, 20, 25 people. They'll see that error. They won't know where to solve it. They'll be upset that they don't know where to solve it. They'll think, I run this whole thing. I need to know where everything's at. And then they just go down this rabbit hole of trying to be an IC again. And then they're completely neglecting their leadership skills and leading their team, and instead they're end up micromanaging and getting involved in the weeds of something that, and then they think that they're doing a good job. They think, I need to know this, I need to solve this. But the way it comes off to the people that are the contributors on that project is that you don't trust them.
Yeah, you're failing at your job if you find yourself doing that. And again, like this is actually, if that's what you really, really like to do, which again is totally respectable, you're in the wrong place at that point, which makes the whole making yourself redundant even more important for you. Because hey, if you like to chase a bug down the rabbit hole or and figure out what's going on and like find your next gig,
Well, I
you
also
have to do that.
There's another thing I've seen emerge too after talking to so many people.
Yeah.
So the individuals that really, really like the coding and they want the title of CTO. So they'll be like, I want to do this all day, but I want the title of CTO. And I say, you can have both. Absolutely. You just have to make sure whoever's responsible in the org for that type of role, emotionally and structurally, exists. Call them a VP of engineering. Call them a chief operations officer. It doesn't really matter what you call them. You can keep your CTO, go grab 3 to 5 people, and then just build like edge case stuff or build the future, the next iteration that's completely independent from the current business. So some people have figured this out, and I've seen them do it, and they've done it very successfully where they have this office of the CTO.
Office of the CTO, yeah.
Yeah. And it's fantastic. But other people are like really struggling.
Yeah.
They're like, I don't want to do this, but they haven't figured out the office of the CTO thing yet.
Yeah. And office, like I actually wrote like a sort of, I don't want to call it like a position paper, if you will, like an idea, a proposal for the leadership team at Yield Street back in the day, where exactly this, like, well, how does because we had gotten to a point, I had 30 people on my team, and virtually every single person on that team was a smarter engineer than I ever was. And I've no doubt about it. That's the whole point. Like, you want people who are actually smarter than you to run this thing. They need the guidance, they need the air cover to do their best work. But if you're not hiring people smarter than you, you're not really doing your job well either, because but I wrote this thing, okay, well, these guys have it covered. They got the platform. I've given them sort of like the reference frame, the context. I gave plan on this level of scale. We are doing this, we are approaching this channel expansion in this direction, which may take traffic on this portion of the platform. So let's look at ways to make that more horizontally scalable, blah, blah. So the sort of like, here's the problem statement. Now deploy your massive genius brain on it and figure out. And I would love to hear and be a participant in the discussion of the solution of it. But I'm like, I wouldn't even claim to. I'll ask questions because at the end of the day, I love this stuff. I'm an engineer, and I may make some recommendations here and there, but it's your thing. You own this because I trust you to do a much better job than I would myself solving this problem. That's why I hired you. So then I wrote this office of the CTO thing. And if you are able to create that, that's the whole making yourself redundant doesn't necessarily mean a path out of the company. It can be, or to your next gig. Your next gig may well be within the company. Not every company necessarily gets to the point where they have the luxury.
Say it again. Yeah. Say it again. I really actually want you to say, like, you are exactly right. Like, your next gig can be inside the company.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah. It's just not what it was when you started with this. You moved on to that. You've scaled it. You've done a great job building your team, building your leadership, building the platform, getting the platform to where you were. Hopefully you've done a great job, and now you're looking to do what's next, an R&D wing in your company. That's great. Get, let's say, I had all of these ideas and thoughts that I wish I was able to do at Yield Street, but, I decided to, move on for family reasons. But there's still a document somewhere in Yield Street knowledge base about Office of the CTO, and I hope the current CTO is able to get there at some point soon, in fact, because we really have an incredible team that we built over literally crafted over the years. Let's say you get the funding, right? You get the green light, you get the funding to do this R&D. Hey, we have this interesting project that we want to figure out how to use NLP and Gen AI to actually do the deal sourcing. I'm using a Yield Street example just because that's more recent. But that's a moonshot kind of thing, right? It's like it's important to do. It's important to kind of like it's an innovation thing. It's like a whole innovation wing, an R&D wing of the company. That's a very common and a beautiful logical place for a early stage CTO in a company to end up in the same company. If you can get that, then you land in the right place. Like, this is great. We like all the power to it. None of the make yourself redundant bit is made irrelevant by that, because you're still not in the weeds there anymore. So that thing, you're not going to be in the day-to-day of that. Someone else is going to be. Who is that? How do you keep that running? Because ultimately, that's what's keeping the company moving. That's the bread and butter. It's like the search of Google. And so if someone wants to go and do Google Glass, something's paying for the Google Glass. It has to be the thing that you build. So you owe it to the team and the company to make sure that's in good hands when you're not around to manage it day to day.
An exercise that I can't remember where I got it from, but I implemented it and it worked, so it stuck with me. But it was defining what done looks like. So just actually, if I have a system or a marketing process at my business, it's like, okay, here's a system, it's a marketing system. The purpose of it is to generate new leads. And we need to build the system. Here's what done looks like. Done looks like the report that shows me A, B, and C, or whatever it might be. But working backwards like that, as you go through distributing your knowledge, de-weeding yourself, designing your leadership org and your culture, asking yourself that question, what does done look like for each of those? I think that would get people 20% of the way there.
Yeah. I think the best way to do that litmus test of are you done, writing it down is first of all, so you look at your own day at that level of scale, right? You'll see there's a Series C company at this point. We have 70 people in the tech org broadly, I think close to 70 now. Look at your day. Like I look at my own day, and I kind of maybe an average of a day over a course of a week or a couple of weeks, and say, okay, here's all the things that I did that I was called, that people came to talk to me about, or I was asked to or decided to do, whether it's external relationships, whether it's some other department, in the company that needed some institutional knowledge support, because you're still carrying that despite all the, despite all best attempts to document stuff, you're not going to get every little bit down on paper. It's just not possible. There's too much. Your done will be demonstrated by proactively putting someone in that role, and just say for the next week. And I didn't quite do this in a structured way, but thinking back, that's what I would do, because I did it on sort of like a need basis, but hey, for the next week, just like I'm going to redirect anything that comes to me. Let's say you identified who your successor is, right? Who you think would be the best positioned leader in your team to take over your role, should that need arise at some point. And you just let them do it. See how they do. So it's a massive amount of delegation and redirection, which sounds like, okay, you're just trying to make things easy for yourself, and maybe there's a little bit.
But you are, though. But that's the thing.
The whole point, right?
That's the point. The point is to make yourself. You want to make your job so easy. I would love to have the conversation with my CEO and my board, saying, "Hey, I am so good at my job that you guys don't even need me anymore. The thing that you were decided you needed a CTO for that justified the spend, that thing is autonomously running now. It's been solved. Do you need me to do something else?" If you get to that mindset and you get to that level of value, you will never, ever have trouble getting a job or joining a team, because they're going to, what is that CEO going to do, Hrishi, or that board, if they don't have a position or they don't have anything for that person? They're going to tell people to use them. They're like, Hrishi was great. Like, he came in here and he did this thing. He made himself redundant. It was amazing. Like, you should definitely use him. And you can't hide talent. You can't hide talent like that.
This is basically the thing that gets missed. Like, if you're staying in there because you're so I'm not gonna get a gig anywhere else, then you're proactively starting to underperform as a CXO, really, but again, CTO for sure. Because of and CTOs talk about it. We techies talk about this in a non-human context all the time. It's an essential tenet of system design for scale, right? We talk about system redundancy. We talk about transparent failover. We talk about single points of
Resiliency.
failure,
Yeah.
resiliency. These are equally applicable to human capital as they are to systems. Because systems and humans are part of the entire enterprise value of an org. So if you have redundancy, and we've had experiences, and I've had experience in the past in other, and both at Hill Street and elsewhere in other departments, where someone moved on for very, for their own reasons, other opportunities. I was the only person who was doing that job. Like, there was no part, I tried to, I hope that's still, I'm pretty sure that's still happening, but there was no portion, I tried to do everything to make sure that there's no portion of the Yield platform that at least 2 people, ideally 3, know how it works. Down to the semicolon and the indentation, this is this is how it works. And then there's this expanding circle of okay, well, there's this core set of 3 people who know deeply how that service works. And then there are some that have a high level knowledge and high level, but there's no part of the platform that is complete, what's the word for it? Left field territory for anyone.
Well, that happens though. It does come about. People will say, we don't want to touch it. No one knows how it works here. So we just don't touch it.
They're afraid to touch it. It's I don't know what's going to break. Yeah. I mean, there are pieces of tech debt,
but that's how that happened though. I did a conversation with somebody 6 or 7 years ago, and they were telling me confidentially, so they abstracted the name of the power plant, but there was a power plant in northeast United States where nobody knew how to modify or understand or read the code that ran the plant. And when it went down, there was this huge issue, right? They're calling people out of the retirement homes and stuff. They're trying to find somebody that understood. Luckily now we have GPTs and LLMs, right, that can help us with this. But yeah, there's definitely the scenario that happens where things just die off. How do you prevent, let's get a little weird here. At your company, how do you actually, do you care enough to monitor it? And if so, how do you monitor that there's at least a couple people that understand? Is it?
Yeah, that's actually, this is something that I recently posted about on my blog, and it ties into the ever-present beast of tech debt, right? Every piece of software. This is what I wrote on the blog. Every piece, people say, we have too much tech debt, and it's slowing our shipping velocity. It's all true. Tech debt's real. Stuff happens. The thing is, absolutely any piece of software that you write that goes into production and has to be maintained from the day it goes into production starts its life as tech debt.
Correct.
It's only a matter of time, so think of this horrifying thing. There's entire banking systems that are still freaking running on mainframes written in COBOL. You know how many COBOL developers there are in the world? Actually, I don't know. There's probably
very few.
Double figures for probably in the entire world. What happens when that generation dies out? There's no one who understands this stuff. Sure, we can pick it up. If we can get some out-of-print COBOL programming book. Yeah. So what do you do? You basically, and this is also hard to do. And this actually we managed to do a decently good job of it at Hill Street. I can't say I've been very successful with it over my career. I had fun writing that blog post. But here's the thing. Just like libraries are end of life, right? Our versions are end of life. Whether it's every bit of software you write, part of the maintenance is end of lifing it. Now that can be in 2. They can take 2 shapes. One is just no one's using this stuff. We built it 3 years ago. It's this little algorithm that I wrote up over an afternoon, and that feature has long since been decommissioned, but the piece of code is still sitting there. Just nuke it, just get rid of it. And the other thing is basically aging your software, even heavily used software. There's always a compelling case that you can make for rewriting something that, even if it's working, It's like, it's the natural evolution of software. Like, let's say like your basic system, right? Okay, but I wrote a login module like 2015, but it's still used to log into Yieldstreet. Like, my little rack tag. Okay, here's how you do session management. Like, but one of the conversations that we started having last year was, and again, it's not complicated. Like, it's freaking login. It's anyone can write it, and you can read the code and you understand how it works. But as an example, like, is this like, it's 10-year-old code. That's way too old. It should not be there anymore. What do? Like, okay, well, it's time to upgrade this. Let's use Auth0. Let's use some other provider. Let's upgrade that piece of software. Particularly true for and this is something that it's also a part of like your whole redundancy documentation thing. Like, what are the absolutely mission critical paths in your platform? Like, you cannot make those stop working ever. No matter what, they always have to work. They have to work impeccably. You're an investment platform. You got to be able to invest. Like, you got to be able to move money around. If you can, like, that's a problem. So monitor those, monitor the usage, monitor their aging, see where they're like, because software moves fast. Like, there's a very good chance that something you spent a ton of time writing that's cranky, that's all like, convoluted code, someone has probably built an embedded version of that by now. Take account linking. Like, we spent a lot of time in LearnVest writing against Yodlee APIs to aggregate financial accounts, right? Yeah. You don't, like, that's all embedded software now. You don't have to do it.
You don't, there's it's so easy now.
So imagine the sense of liberation. Like, if the footprint of your maintained software software base should not be monotonically increasing. It's a part of just regular. You should make it. It's a habit forming thing where you just make it a habit to actively look at old, crufty pieces of code, even if they're working, and just end of life them.
You know who does this a lot? Salesforce. So when I interviewed Parker, one of the co-founders, he had made some comment and I stopped him in the interview. I was like, you rewrite your systems like Salesforce? You rewrite it every year? He's like, yeah. He's like, we constantly are just rewriting it.
Wow.
And I was blown away. I had to ask him twice. I was like, are you sure you're rewriting? He's like, yeah. He's like, we are constantly rewriting the systems. Like, we never stop redoing them. And it makes sense too, especially if you have something that's like a contact database and, there's by the time you get another year around, there's some efficiency that's been gained and some new technology. And if you can implement it at the Salesforce scale, it's almost it's like financially worth it, right? Because you get a small percentage efficiency across all your servers, and that cuts the cost of that, right?
It actually is. You said it right. You said it exactly right. This is not just a protect yourself against obsolescence, protect your software against obsolescence thing. It's actually a cost saving measure. Because you can divert a lot of like. It's just crazy how much time over time, is spent in just maintaining things that are built. Even things like, I look at tickets sometimes. I used to back until recently, and I feel like, why are we even fixing this? Who's using this? Like, is anyone even like, is this like a corner use case that like once was a thing? Like, I give you an example. Like, this is a bit of, and it's not like IP or anything. So when we launched Yieldstreet 10 years ago, it was like many platforms, it was an invite-only platform, right? So because we weren't publicly, we were just early days of launch. So when we launched it, you had to send in a request to be part of it that was vetted, and
they would call you. I remember. Exactly. I remember. Yeah.
So there's this whole access request module that I wrote. Again, simple piece of software. It's still there. We've been not an invite-only platform for close on a decade now. It's not used. It's not hurting anything, but it's still bloating the code base. And it's just this, piece of software. Like, and we talked about this Office of the CTO thing. Like, and sure, one part of that could be just like, doing moonshot projects, but it doesn't all have to be that. There is actually a lot of interesting software. Like, if you're spending time making your team's job of maintaining the platform that you built increasingly easier, it's freeing them up to do new things. Because one of the very common debates and arguments that I've been a part of, and I dare say other CTOs as well, with your CEO or with your business leaders, is like, they just like, we built the first version in like 3 weeks. Why is it like, it was like 2 people, and we were able to do it in 3 weeks. Now you have 40 people. Why is it taking so long to do the simple thing? Because it's because it was small. It was easy to do. Like when you have 40 people and you have like 40 microservices as opposed to one app, the whole reason it's slower is because it's bigger and the team is bigger. It's like the whole mythical man one. Then it goes into that rabbit hole, which is not worth going. But the point is, if you can proactively create space in your development work, in your sprints, in your whatever, to say, I'm going to maintenance is not just about fixing bugs. Maintenance is about actually maintaining. And an essential part of maintaining, I was talking as if I did a good job of it, which I didn't do nearly enough
we'll
of that.
say you did.
Like, well, I tried to, let's say, and we were reasonably successful because we rewrote large swaths of the old monolith that we written around 2019. They done a complete overhaul of the platform, which is great. And now it's all broken down, and we've been chipping away at that thing. It's at that old code base. So we did it reactively. Not all of it, but a lot of it was done reactively because there are certain critical paths that we really needed to scale. There were certain portions of the platform that were just that needed to be more flexible than they were because the requirements around them changed. So external catalysts drove that maintenance effort, but it doesn't have to be. You can actually have a team, a platform team, an R&D team, call it what you will, create a unit, rotate people in and out of that so they get exposed to that. But keep looking at the footprint and keep looking actively at bits of code that you've written, and you have GitHub to help you. The last commit was 2 years ago. Is anyone using this shit? Get rid of it, or let's rewrite this. I just found this new provider that just does this, as a service, and people use this maybe once or twice a month to update their phone number or whatever. We don't need to maintain this at all. Just outsource that. It's a habit forming challenge because the obvious and understandable impulse with every new piece of development, every new sprint, is to build new things, to grow new things, and make sure that stuff, it's always build new things and make sure stuff doesn't break. Build new things. And there's this whole gray space in the middle, which hardly gets any attention until something breaks. And then it goes into that, okay, it's breaking, let's fix it. You can get ahead of that. And we kind of started from the knowledge redundancy part, but this is the whole distributing knowledge. It's really valuable for this. The number one thing of the make yourself redundant, when you rotate people in and out of this sort of quote unquote platform team that's responsible for just health of the platform, just pure health. And part of that health is making sure it's fresh, it's new. Things that are not used are churned out. Things that are heavily used or things that are old are actively looked at and saying, okay, is there a better way to do this? Go out and find out. And we have people who read a lot. There's amazing things. One of the best things I've subscribed to over the years from hey, what's going on out there thing is changelog. And there's a lot of them, Hacker News, but changelog is brilliant because it actually has here's the active repos, here's some of the things. And I can literally do a search on something that I'm trying to do a refactor on. And it's someone else is yeah, here's a library that does it. I understand you take on a little bit of risk there by externalizing something. Now you're relying on the maintenance of that library, but you make judgment calls around that. But in general, you age your software. You have to do an aging analysis of your software all the time to kind of keep it fresh. And that actually has a fringe benefit of helping distribute the knowledge of your platform, because nothing gets you deep into the weeds of any part of the platform as rewriting it.
Well, one of the things I would do I wrote software for 17 years, and it's probably been about five years I haven't been actively writing software. But when I would build a class or whatever it would be, I would, and I didn't do this all the time. I picked this up probably halfway through my career because I saw someone do it at a conference, like live coding conference, and they determined how long they determined at the beginning how long this code would live for. They'd say, okay, I'm writing this code it's going to be like 3 months. This code's going to be useful for like 3 months or 2 years, and then we're going to rewrite the platform. So they set this expectation, even in like the comments on the model, of like, hey, this is for just to get us to funding. Like, we just need a quick and dirty MVP to get us some buttons on the screen to get some basic stuff. So that's what we're writing this chunk of code for. And I thought that was really interesting. So I did my version of that going forward with the systems. And it was really helpful, but it's to your point of like, it's determining the age before you even go about the project.
Yeah. And that actually goes beyond just age. Like, you can, if you're building a prototype to get funding, and this is the classic, and I wish I could claim that I did a good job, but I bombed twice on this. Definitely not going to do it for a third time. The little thing that you build to get funding, the little thing that you build, your prototype, your MVP, whatever, not MVP so much, but your prototype to, it's so tempting to just keep building on top of it and launch. And you end up launching something on Heroku that was written in like, I don't know, Ruby on Rails, like not nearly like, you get the funding, use it to build it for real. Build it for real. Like, and doesn't mean build the whole thing. And not all prototypes suck as well. So just to be clear, but like often like the directive, and more often than not, it's it tends to be like a development partner, right? Unless it's one of the founders is technical and she's doing it herself. The number of times prototype becoming product has been the source of original organic tech debt, not just in my own experience, but of my friends' experiences as well. Friends who are similar, early stage CTOs. It's people. There's people write about it, how bad it is, what a terrible idea it is. But it's so, but when you're in that kind of like velocity of like, okay, well, kind of funding and we got to launch and there's tech crunch and like, you just, it takes a extraordinary amount of convincing the founders or whoever that, hey, let's just take a little step back and do it right. Build it for the actual future and not just like, trust me, no production system should ever run on Heroku. What you said about like, aging the piece of software, it actually also helps around sizing it. So if it's not like a prototype for funding, but a feature that you're launching, and this is the other thing that that is the source of a lot of contention between business and tech, is like, why, like, hey, we need to build this. How long will it take? The whole estimation, which
that's always fun. Yeah.
At some point, someone will realize that it is absolutely impossible to estimate software accurately. It just doesn't.
I know. They've tried points. I've tried every software. It's just like, I don't know. You spend all this time figuring it out. It's like, I just spent a third of my time. I could have been doing it.
Yeah. Exactly. When you change that around and say, okay, well, we don't know where this is going to go. So I'm going to build something that's so small that I know I could do it in 3. So it's not, you're changing the question. You're not saying how long will it take to build this. You say, this is what you're trying to solve for. How long? What can you build in, pick your window, like 3 weeks?
What's the least amount that you can build to achieve the outcome? Yeah.
Now, and you do that, you make sure that the experience is impeccable. You don't compromise on that ever. You're compromising. You're just trimming the feature set, and it's like, this is all. We don't need to do like all.
You're
of these
compromising with your inner nerd.
Yeah.
That like wants to build up and scale up. I mean,
and
we're so good at making things more complicated, aren't we? Like it's actually the hardest thing to do is to keep it simple.
Simple, yes.
It is so hard to do that because when we're adders, we're creators, and so what's the answer to every problem? To create more.
More, exactly.
You just create more.
And then this is something that I just recently wrote about. It's just like the one entity that starts getting almost marginalized in that journey is the actual user of your software, because the more you complicate your system, the more you start impacting the end user's experience using it. Because and I wrote a post about eventual consistency, which again, as a concept, I truly respect, and it has its places and it has its virtues and values. But like in a very tech-driven effort to make everything infinitely scalable, you stop to think about like, first, does it really need to be? Like, are you really going to be taking 1,000 hits a second on this particular endpoint? But more importantly, like, what's it going to look like when this update is going to happen in a few milliseconds and not right away? When what am I as a user when I click that button expecting to see something on the other screen and not seeing that on the other screen, on the next screen?
It's broken, so you just hit refresh a bunch.
Yeah, exactly.
You know that.
What I've realized after like these three back-to-back, I guess, CTO experiences, and I'm sure there'll be more, is that no matter what you're building or who you're building it for, the core challenges, the core points of contention, whether it's between your engineering org and the business, whether it's within the engineering org, between product and tech, etc., they're all almost the same. They're so completely portable. Like I advise a bunch of startups as well. And the things that they come and ask me, like, hey, can you help us with X? It's like the same script. It's like, it's there. So I think that gives me hope, in the sense that if the problems are common, then the solutions, or solutions, or at least there is no solutions. There's just like mitigation approaches. That's all. That's the best we can do in this world, I think. And that's still a win. They tend to be portable, so you can carry that to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, especially from and this is something that now we're kind of like talking about things that has to be ingrained in, again, your own leadership team, because you can't be the one and only spokesperson that's kind of like disseminating this to the whole org or to your own team. Like, you want your leaders and you want this thought process, this culture, this philosophy to percolate down, so that it just becomes a part of the day-to-day how you do things. Like, and people come into teams from different experiences. At Deal Street, it was particularly interesting, and actually had a blast scaling the team there, because it is a truly diverse, culturally diverse, geographically diverse team. They were in like 4 different countries, and they all bring their own set of experiences and competencies to the table. But then you see, I know we are coming up on time, but you see that, okay, well, once you've kind of established a framework and an environment, a zeitgeist, if you will, for your org to do their best work, people get it. Like it because it's ultimately, they get to do their best work, and they know what the guardrails are, and then the environment you're creating is actually to help them do their best work, which is, what else would you want, right? As any professional, but certainly as an engineer, because remember, we're weird people. Like we don't like to be told what to do. Like, don't tell me just to drop this pixel on the homepage. Like, tell me the problem you're trying to solve, and I will suggest some pixels. Look at the one that you're looking
just
at.
drop the pixels.
Just like, don't ask, like,
I just need one checkbox right there.
Yeah.
Just on the page. Can you just put the checkbox there? Hrishi, dude, thank you so much for doing this. I apologize.
Absolutely.
I have another call that backed up to this that I have to go to, but we were going to have our next conversation. We'll do another episode in a couple months, maybe in person, but I want to do it on the culture of Yield Street.
I would love to do that. And this time I will happily come down to Nashville.
Let's do it. Thank you so much for listening. And if you found this episode useful, please share it with a friend or a colleague who you think would get value from it. And if you have topics that you would like to hear discussed on the podcast, either add me on LinkedIn or send me an email, joel@moderncto.io.
Every time I get an email or LinkedIn message, it absolutely makes my day and inspires me to keep going.